So when people look at themselves over their lives and think about their conscious states and so on, and their various responses to things around them, I think they often think, well, who am I? They ask themselves, what am I and who am I? And they're looking for unity of some sort, it seems to me, and not necessarily a unity that's fixed forever, a sort of permanence, but some sort of satisfactory unity, which is satisfactory in many dimensions. And so, this is basically a lead up for Jerrold Seigel too. That you said there were 3 dimensions of the self, and then you weren't as sure whether there was some sort of overarching notion of the self. But here's a suggestion: the self is some sort of unity of all these various aspects, bodily aspects, reflective aspects, social aspects, and so on, and that the self is just this guiding, end we have as creatures trying to find out about ourselves. Well, that begs the question, but trying to find out something. And does that make sense to you?
Well, I think there's no doubt that in some way we are all, as human beings, mixtures of these dimensions, and that I believe that any theory of the self that does not recognize that is, which tries specifically to exclude one of the dimensions, is bound to be inadequate. And it's almost certain to have been created for some particular purpose, to argue something about human beings that allows a certain person to give them advice or claim that they are in a particular way radically free or radically unfree. These are the uses to which the notion of the self is put. But I think there's no doubt that we ought to think about ourselves. But let me just stop there and point out to you what I've said. I think we ought to think about ourselves in a certain way. Now, in other words, when I said that, what was I saying? Was I saying that we ought to think about something about ourselves which we call the self? That is, should we think about our space selves in this way, or should we think about ourselves in this way? And one of the things this points up is that the notion of the self is, to begin with, a reflexive notion. That is, it simply turns the object which we are talking about back onto itself. And there is in many languages the idea of the self, or the phrase for the self, contains the notion of sameness. So that in French you say for the self moi-même, or in Italian you say io stesso. Those are both words that mean same. Or in German you can say die Sache selbst, that is the very thing, or the very notion. In other words, the self is a notion we use to emphasize our attention to something, whether it be our personal being or some other kind of thing. And again, the whole question is in what way we want to make that emphasis.